They have actually partnered with a number of states. They have partnered with a number of superintendents. So chances are your children are already learning the whitest of whitewashed history. If you do not currently have access to a Black-centered Saturday school, you have to get in connection with the people in your community to build one, because your kids are going to come home on some bullshit.
Recently, I caught Loree Daniel Favors on her show on SiriusXM's Urban View, delivering one of the most urgent breakdowns that I've heard in a while, warning of the possibility that content from Prager University, aka PragerU, would continue to expand its reach into classrooms across the country, particularly in the wake of the Trump administration gutting funding for public broadcasting. Now, I'm no stranger to this particular danger, but if you're not completely familiar, know that this is a massive escalation of the ongoing attempt to dramatically reimagine our public school systems, part of an at times diabolical, right-wing, white Christian nationalist strategy that's been in the works for years and is rapidly unfolding under our all too distracted noses. Forcing the dismantling of institutions like the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and PBS under the pretense that they're too liberal or too woke is just a flashy cover story. The real play looks like a plan to replace those outlets with the ideologically driven content factory known as PragerU. And while these developments are incredibly troubling for all of our students, as with anything bad in America, it's going to be particularly bad for Black Americans. On her program, Favors detailed exactly why, and she is 100% correct.
Prager University is the white Karen Moms for Liberty response to the fears that they had about their children learning the history of this country in real time. And so when your kids are coming home from school, you should be clear that it's not that they're learning American history. They're learning white mythology. They have actually partnered with a number of states. They have partnered with a number of superintendents. So chances are your children are already learning the whitest of whitewashed history. If you do not currently have access to a Black-centered Saturday school, to an African-centered after-school program, you'll have to get in connection with the people in your community to build one, because your kids are going to come home on some bullshit.
All of this is true and terrible, but it's even worse than that, and I'm going to explain why. I'm also going to, as I do, offer potential counteroffensive derived from hip-hop culture. So let's go. I first learned about this dastardly brainchild of Dennis Prager a few years ago, working on one of my other podcasts, Unfucking the Republic. Now, once you get through this video, you might want to go listen to that episode, rightly titled, F*** You, PragerU, for the full breakdown on how this propaganda machine came to be. For reference, the episode's description should give you enough primer for the moment. Hey, Max from UNFTR, you want to jump in and give us the episode synopsis right quick?
Of course. Always happy to oblige the great Manny Faces. So for years, the propagandists with the greatest visibility in the United States were on television. These are the ones who contributed the most to the manufacture of consent. So think Fox News and all of the copycat media outlets that we have today. And we've covered many of the dark hidden figures looming in the background who've churned out the ideas that ultimately make it into the mainstream media. So think Milton Friedman, James Buchanan, Lewis Powell, the Koch brothers, Robert Mercer, Peter Thiel, and the myriad think tanks like Mercatus, Cato, and Heritage. So today, we cover another contributor to the perverted right-wing ecosystem, Prager University and its folksy baritone patriarch, Dennis Prager.
Thanks, man. See, PragerU didn't start as a curriculum provider per se. It began as a conservative media outlet funded by billionaires, one of which led an organization whose mission it was to, quote, bring the Bible back into schools, so that should tell you much of what you need to know. Anyway, they started producing slick, short videos designed to gently penetrate your brain cells with right-wing ideology in something of an insidiously brilliant strategic way. It's a secret weapon of sorts. See, the videos aren't blatant. They're designed to appear fairly innocuous, feeding curiosity about some of the nation's philosophical issues in a light, breezy manner. From UNFTR.
Here's the first big important thing you need to know about PragerU. On the surface, it appears to ignore the larger culture war battles, but don't be fooled. Culture war hysteria is woven into a larger narrative about what they perceive to be illegitimate liberalism. It bleeds into mostly everything that appears on its media platform, from climate change and policing to guns and, yes, culture war issues like toxic masculinity.
The same masculine traits that bring destruction also defeat tyranny. The traits that foster greed also build economies. The traits that drive men to take foolish risks also drive men to take heroic risks. The answer to toxic masculinity isn't less masculinity. It's better masculinity.
That clip you just heard has more than 10 million views on YouTube.
With this cleverly disguised and delivered propaganda, including calling itself a university when it is abso-fucking-lutely not a university, PragerU has been exceptionally effective as a powerful ideological gateway drug for young people, particularly men, to be swallowed into, often without even realizing what's happening, this ecosystem of right-wing media outlets and personalities that are feeding the ever-growing authoritarian beast. And yes, white men, mainly, though not exclusively. Hold that thought. Now, when I say effective, it's actually frightening how good they've been. As we reported on UNFTR,
And by its own admission, its viewers are getting younger and are spreading its content far and wide. In 2018, BuzzFeed published a comprehensive piece about PragerU's meteoric rise. The story began with an anecdote about a then sophomore in high school who came across a PragerU video online called Iran and the Bomb, featuring now New York Times columnist Bret Stephens. He then started loading up more and more of PragerU's videos. He was hooked. As the kid told BuzzFeed, PragerU was instrumental in shaping his beliefs he didn't know he had a few weeks earlier. After watching hours of content, his brain was literally rewired. The most memorable line in the story is the one I'm about to recite. It was so poignant, in fact, that PragerU reportedly leveraged it in its marketing material despite the mostly negative tone of the article itself. Here it is. Quote, "It took 2 months for Prager University, one of the biggest, most influential, and yet least understood forces in online media, to mold a conservative," end quote. And that is what we're up against.
After the 2020 murder of George Floyd and the resulting racial justice reckoning, Prager University, which again is not a university, kicked into overdrive, pumping out content, garnering millions and millions of views on videos meant to counter the national conversations about racism and police brutality and systemic inequity that suddenly became impossible for many white Americans to ignore. Remember, it only took 2 months to essentially create a hard right-leaning conservative out of thin air. And through digital trickery like retargeting, it's essentially when, you look at one site for furniture and then you get served 730,928% more pieces of furniture content. That doesn't happen by accident. So by using those same techniques, the right was able to envelop these folks in their digital clutches. And as we previously reported on UNFTR, they are absolutely targeting your children.
In its 2021 report, Dennis Prager says that PragerU had another incredible year with exponential growth on all fronts. Viewers and subscribers have exploded. Content is now available for all ages, including children as young as 3 years old.
Maybe that's what Snoop Dogg should be worried about. See, killing PBS wasn't about PBS being too woke. It was a coup to replace them with PragerU. They are quite literally now coming for your kids with content that severely warps history and reality.
The southern colonies were dependent on slave labor, and they wouldn't have joined a union that had banned it.
Are you okay with that?
I'm certainly not okay with slavery, but the founding fathers made a compromise to achieve something great: the making of the United States.
Most gender stereotypes exist because they reflect the way that men and women are naturally different.
One of the most beautiful things God has created is a woman's smile. It can fill a room with energy and joy. Just try smiling and see how it affects the people around you.
Chicago is a bustling metropolis famous for food, fun, and an iconic skyline. But beneath those tall buildings, Chicago has a dark side and a long history of crime, poverty, and low-performing schools.
Slavery is as old as time and has taken place in every corner of the world, even amongst the people I just left. Being taken as a slave is better than being killed, no? I don't see the problem.
I don't see the problem. Wow. We had an educator who's also a state representative in Oklahoma named Gabe Wolion. He has used PragerU content in the classroom. So if you're wondering if the video you're showing right there, this, retelling of slavery from Christopher Columbus's point of view, what you heard from fake Frederick Douglass there, if that's actually been used in the classroom, I have met educators who have started to integrate this kind of stuff with young children. And I want to point out one thing, because a lot of people have paid attention to that Christopher Columbus clip where he says, that being taken as a slave is better than being killed, and he doesn't see a problem. Not only is that an opinion and a sort of form of propaganda to put in front of children, but actually primary source documents from slaves themselves that educators across the country have access to completely undermine that. People who were enslaved spoke very often about the fact that they were willing to put their lives at risk, willing to die in order to escape plantations in the South. Frederick Douglass, in fact, attempted multiple escapes, and he famously got engaged in a physical altercation with a notorious slave breaker who was trying to dominate and harm him. And fighting back when you are an enslaved person is something that, again, they knew could end their lives.
Yep.
And I've spoken to educators about why they would use this. They say, well, it's about alternative perspectives, or, some of the documents we have are liberal perspectives, and this is a conservative one. But it's really not that. There's the truth, there's the reality of what slavery represented to the United States, and then there seems to be this major push that's been gaining steam for years now to recast the entire American story, to resist feeling guilt about what happened and what was a central part of our founding. And it's really alarming for the educators who are being pushed to use this stuff, for the parents who are finding out their kids are exposed to it. And it's having a real impact. You just spelled out it's in 10 states already, but I've spoken to Dennis Prager. I know their team. I've visited their headquarters in California. They have a 50-state strategy.
And as bad as that is, not only will kids be taught the whitest of whitewashing, but many will then find themselves fully indoctrinated into far worse ideologies in ways that many parents will never see coming. Many will recognize all of this as part of an overarching pattern of attacks on multiculturalism led by the Trump administration. Examples include the gutting of the board of the Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts, and recent reports that the Smithsonian Institution itself will face an audit to, quote, ensure alignment with the president's directive to celebrate American exceptionalism, remove divisive or partisan narratives, and restore confidence in our shared cultural institutions. It's another clear step towards reshaping national cultural memory to fit an exclusionary narrative. These moves come on the heels of the dismantling of the Department of Education and the protections that come with it, hurting students and families across all demographics, but even more, those in communities of color and poor areas across the country. This follows the administration's efforts to hold funding for educational institutions hostage under the guise of protecting against anti-Semitism, but according to many critics, the true goal is simply to ensure ideological compliance. These are all pages from the Authoritarian playbook. Control the institutions that shape what people know, and you can control the future. As famed French lawyer and statesman Maximilien de Robespierre said,
"The secret of freedom lies in educating people, whereas the secret of tyranny is in keeping them ignorant."
This is where hip-hop comes in ways you might think, but also in ways you might not. In my recent op-ed for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, I reflected on a moment from 1989, when KRS-One dropped his song, "You Must Learn." In just the course of a few minutes, KRS delivered a history lesson on Black inventors and leaders like Benjamin Banneker, Madam C.J. Walker, Lewis Latimer, Dr. Charles Drew, and so many others, names that were pretty much missing from most public school curricula at the time. Now, using music to relay information to the masses, particularly as a form of protest or obfuscated communication, is nothing new. Spirituals and other songs sung by enslaved people in the United States often contained messages of hope and resilience, even rebellious instruction. Rap, though, presented a new paradigm of protest music, caked in a term that was originally attributed to Walt Disney, I think, but definitely reintroduced to us in the 1980s by KRS-One and, ironically, now being used by PragerU, the term edutainment. But with this type of work, KRS-One and others would simultaneously do two monumentally important things. Not only was transmission of information through this type of music done with a verbosity and depth that no other genre in the past could ever have achieved, but in doing so, this was literally circumventing the very education system that the song was supplementing and critiquing. Where joints like Wade in the Water, essentially a message to escaping enslaved folks to walk through water to avoid tracking dogs and slave catchers, had to be more subtle. Rap music was perfectly fine dropping knowledge in plain sight, or sound, and demonstrating just how much the music and the culture would find ways to revolutionize areas of society through direct integration with the art forms, and later by fostering a culture of innovation that would move past the beats and rhymes and evolve into an enlightened way of thinking that would help change systems in a way that we're only beginning to understand, but that are urgently needed, today more than ever. One way is hip-hop-based education. As I often say, among the various instances where hip-hop is helping find ways to uplift humanity and improve society, education might be the most mature. There exists plenty of documentation of the effectiveness of hip-hop as a pedagogical tool. Now, I've shared tons on this subject here on this YouTube channel, its accompanying Hip Hop Can Save America podcast, and my Substack newsletter. And in my recent Cornell West-endorsed book on the subject, Hip Hop Can Save America, Inspiration for the Nation from a Culture of Innovation.
Well, I salute the work you've been doing, though. Hip Hop Can Save America.
Suffice to say, the academic community has been documenting this phenomenon for decades. But I get it if this is new or even surprising information. In 2025, many educators still haven't heard of hip-hop-based education. You might even be calling bullshit. Well, you can do the homework and research all of this yourself. But if you insist I point to some things, here's a 2024 meta-study that studies multiple hip-hop-based education studies and found that hip-hop-based pedagogy significantly improves student learning efficiency. So yeah, it's a thing. Now, as I mentioned in that opinion piece, programs like Science Genius have paired rappers with teachers to help students write and perform rhymes about science concepts, increasing the mastery of the subjects they're learning and enhancing transferable life skills like public speaking and self-confidence. Educators like Dr. Lauren Lee Kelly have written entire guides, like her book Teaching with Hip Hop in the 7 to 12th grade classroom, that include actionable lessons that can help teach metaphor, history, geography, and culture, all through hip-hop references. School counselors like Dr. Ian Levy have literally turned their offices into recording studios, giving students a safe space to process trauma and express feelings in ways traditional counseling often doesn't, can't, or won't. And in STEM, initiatives like Breakbeat Code are teaching Python programming through beat making. No drag and drop training wheels, just real coding in a context that makes sense to these young learners who then instantly become excited about a field that hasn't always been very welcoming to them. Now, I can and often do give hundreds more examples. The point, though, is that in school settings, hip-hop-inspired educators have found brilliant and compelling alternatives to traditional, underachieving methods of teaching, creating a way to truly help equal the educational playing field and indeed inspire a collective rising of all boats, all by activating key characteristics found in the tenets derived from hip-hop, the world's most inclusive, ingenious, and inspiring cultural movement of our time. I mean, let's look at Oklahoma and the absurdity of implementing ridiculous tests based on racist ideological standards.
But one of PragerU's most loyal supporters happens to be the state currently ranked 50th in education, Oklahoma. This week, Oklahoma announced it will require teachers from New York and California to pass an America First test designed by PragerU before being hired in the state. The state's public school superintendent said the test is an effort to root out, quote, radical leftist ideology from classrooms and warned that Connecticut, Illinois, Minnesota, and others could soon join the list.
If Oklahoma truly cared about the education of its students, maybe it could have pulled itself from being ranked dead-ass last in education in the nation by considering some of these tried and true innovations. But it seems they don't actually care about improving, but indoctrinating, yeah. So if you look at the work being done to ideologically lock down traditional institutions, it should be clearer now how much hip-hop and a hip-hop way of thinking, more so than damn near any other thing I could think of, may be one of the only ways to combat such authoritarian viruses currently infecting our public school systems. which is precisely why the powers that be wouldn't want to see it shine. Now, PragerU is targeting the same youth demographic that hip-hop has always been able to reach, but with the dual mission to both erase Black history and sanitize America's sins, as Lurie Daniel Favors warns about, but also to recruit young people into the white nationalist-adjacent ecosystem. Hip-hop, on the other hand, has the tools, the credibility, and the cultural capital to engage those same young people from all demographics, mind you, in ways that affirm identity, build critical thinking, and deliver information in a way that can organically propagate through the population, like it's always done. If PragerU is an engine for indoctrination, hip-hop can be an engine for inoculation. And make no mistake, the stakes are especially high for historically targeted communities. Forget hip-hop-based pedagogy, all culturally responsive curricula are under attack. But as I just hinted at, the truth is, every student benefits from education that's engaging, inclusive, and uplifting. As I wrote in the AJC piece, every young person wants to be seen. Every student at some point feels like an outsider. They all crave agency, expression, and empowerment. And in fact, research has shown that diversity makes society smarter. Just how Republicans lie about climate change, knowing that they know the truth, particularly because the United States military has been studying it for 40 years, it's probably safe to assume that they also know this truth about diversity in educational spaces. So, if diversity in those spaces makes everyone smarter, and they want to decrease diversity in those spaces, what else can it mean other than they want everyone dumber? For years, there have been conspiracy theories about just how much the rap music genre has been whittled down to a shell of its former or potential self. These arguments are ongoing, with folks looking at hip-hop as nothing but a detriment to society, and Black American society specifically. While on the other hand, many, like me, will insist we don't get stuck criticizing in what the capitalist forces at play push to the masses. Instead, we need to realize two things. One, the real problem continues to be the systemic conditions that many of these artists continue to face in their lives, which lead them to either the activities portrayed in the music or the need to create those personas in order to try and find a way to survive and thrive in communities that continue to be underfunded, under-resourced, underloved, overseen, and over-policed. And that there is more substantive content and radical applications found in hip-hop music and culture today than ever before. And that if we want to change the very systems creating the former, we need to support and uplift the latter. Now, whether or not the industry intentionally leaned into promoting violence in particular to help fill private prisons, et cetera, I know it's never been proven, but it's also not entirely far-fetched. What we do know is that there's an insidious infiltration of hip-hop by those within the right wing as part of their master media plan happening in the present. Now, I wrote about this a few years ago when I first realized what was happening, and I won't get too into the weeds about it now, but the TLDR of it is, remember the retargeting we talked about earlier? See, the PragerU ability to create a conservative is so effective because once an online user has entered that digital ecosystem, they will be served content and ads and search results, all with carefully sculpted and aligned messaging designed to pull you further down the right-wing manosphere slavery wasn't that bad, troops in the streets are fine rabbit hole. Now I know, of course, everyone along the political spectrum does this sort of digital targeting thing, but the right has spent years and millions upon millions of dollars to perfect it. Between content behemoths like PragerU and the Daily Wire, Fox News, Rumble, and Truth Social, major figures like Ben Shapiro and Tucker Carlson, and so much more, the right has created a stranglehold on digital media to target and reiterate their talking points over and over and over and over again to their base, while using the seemingly middle-of-the-road content like PragerU as the gateway drug. The thing I uncovered was that they had figured out an avenue to reach a segment of the population that they previously had little connection to, Black folks, particularly young Black men. And they were doing it through hip-hop. It's a longer conversation, but for now, understand that PragerU material being used in schools is way worse than just an attempt to rewrite history, though it is that. It's part of a very intense, orchestrated, well-funded, well-executed, ongoing campaign to recreate everything as dictated by the white nationalist puppet masters sitting at the top of the Project 2025 pyramid, controlling all the witting and unwitting marionettes they have in their arsenal. So Snoop, Nelly, Cube, academics, none of these prominent hip-hop figures crossing over and getting in bed with the right is an accident. Sure, on the surface, it might look like the same kind of eye-rolling attempts at pandering that the Democrats do, align with some rap stars to try and align with black folks. Look, all of those efforts are so poorly designed and executed because they have no idea that hip-hop is no more a monolith than black people are, and that there are way more authentic and effective ways to connect to those populations and everyone, if you really know what you're doing, through hip-hop. But I'm not going to get into that now. That's a discussion for another day or a paid consultation. Let's talk. In the meantime, the point is, it's not an accident. They are pawns. And if we don't use hip-hop's powers for good, in all the ways that I and others preach about constantly in education, in mental health, social justice, we will continue to see the side that wants us to all have the perspective that slavery wasn't that bad.
I don't see the problem.
Indoctrinate this country's children in a frightening way. Frightening like the phone call is coming from inside the schoolhouse. So, what do we do about this? Well, there are many folks speaking in depth every day about all of these things, so it's always good to stay informed. SiriusXM's Urban View hosts go into a lot of these issues. My Unfucking the Republic family as well. Folks like Mark Lamont Hill, etc. But as far as harnessing the power of hip-hop in particular, and specifically as a vehicle to counteract this violent turn in the nation's education system, many tools also exist. As I mentioned, there are books for teachers, there are lesson plans, there's research, there are conferences, graduate courses, community programs, and my own contribution, the world's most enlightening hip-hop media ecosystem. What's missing is us accepting the fact that it is imperative to understand how hip-hop, and more importantly, this kind of hip-hop mentality, hip-hop-minded folks, can and must be at the center of addressing these and other urgent issues. Earlier this year, Chuck D was asked by Charlemagne the God whether he thought hip-hop still represented the best tool for the revolution. Chuck said no.
Is hip-hop still the best weapon for revolution? No.
Respectfully, I just don't think that's accurate from what I see and what I know. But it's up to us to not let all this revolutionary work I described go unnoticed and unsupported. This is work that's necessary to not only help save this country, but finally get it to where it's supposed to be, if and when we do. Because soon, we won't be able to do this stuff in schools anymore. And songs like You Must Learn aren't going to be enough. It's going to be up to us to learn more about these hip-hop-inspired efforts to remix these rotten systems from the inside and from the outside, and donate your time, your energy, and, yeah, when possible, money. I'll do my best to keep shining light on these examples, but for now, here are some takeaways. For educators, learn more about integrating hip-hop into your teaching, not as a gimmick, but as a proven and urgently needed pedagogy. Not just as a way to teach what you're told to teach, sure, there's some benefits there, but also in case we need to help our communities teach the things that they won't let you teach anymore. Remember, there are concerted efforts by lawmakers in control to frame culturally responsive, affirming, and sustaining education as a threat, when in reality, it's the antidote to the real threats. But it won't be enough to complain. If you love these kids like you say you do, you have to find ways to incorporate this type of thinking into your day-to-day teaching. This channel, the podcast, my book, and me personally are here to help connect those dots for you if you need it. The same for policymakers and activists. See, this is happening at the kids level to ensure that people remain confused and divided from early. Hip-hop represents a powerful way to counter these efforts because nothing brings people together. Nothing is more inclusive. Nothing has more cross-demographic buy-in than hip-hop. Don't be fooled by what the media says hip-hop is. You absolutely must incorporate these ideas and tactics and mindsets into the way that you communicate, the way that you consider policy, and the way that you fight back against authoritarianism. We can show you if you need more understanding, but get on board or get out of the way. For parents, the first and last line of defense. Pay attention to these changes to public education, what they're doing to the organizations that have traditionally supported it, and the plans they have for your children. This isn't a conspiracy theory. It's what they said they're going to do. You need to decide now if you're cool with that. And pay attention to the ways that hip-hop is being used in ways that can counteract all of the violence being inflicted on your children. And I don't mean just violence in the streets. I mean in places like the classroom. Just like all those moms of so-called liberty ran all up in those Board of Education meetings to lay the groundwork for this ideological takeover, we too can march up in those same meetings with receipts about how effective hip-hop pedagogy is, even for the sons and daughters of Karen herself, and demand that our schools adopt these life-changing pedagogical tools, support the teachers' use of these methods now, because again, we might need them later, outside of the school building. And for all of us, pay attention to what's happening beneath the surface of memes and bots and what the loudest partisan extremists on all sides are yelling about. All that is orchestrated so that we all feel exhausted, we remain fully divided, and we just say enough, and we tune out. Believe me when I tell you, now is the time to tune in. Look, the systems that run the country and the world have absolutely been unkind to so many of our citizens, for sure. And we can and should have all the talks about reforming and remixing and completely reinventing those systems once and for all. But if we fully cede them to propaganda machines like PragerU before that can happen, which is the plan, the rollback of rights and freedoms will continue unabated. They don't just want to take control of the American narrative. They want to take control of everything. And your children are next up.
Many faces. You sick for this one. Sick for this one.